Hello, my name is Dr. Mark Lanyon, and I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a therapist here at New London Counseling Center. Having a private practice working with preteens and teens, raising 2 children, and having 3 grandchildren has given me the opportunity, firsthand opportunity, to see how to build and strengthen relationships with preteens and teens. Today, I would like to share 2 of those ways with you. And during this presentation, I'll be using terms young person or young people in place of preteens and teens. I think it'll be a little easier to follow. So 2 keys to building and strengthening relationships with your young person. Those are communication and listening. We're always communicating. Silence is a form of communication. Arguing is a form of communication. Talking is a form of communication. So what are some ways we can better communicate? Well, one is to validate your young person's feelings. And when I'm working with young people and their parents or caregivers, I talk about 4 important words. One is perception, reality, intent, and outcome. And for the young person, perception and reality. Every young person has a perception of what's going on around him or her. But more often than not, that reality isn't quite accurate. But at the time, it doesn't matter if it's accurate or not. What you need to do is validate their feelings and what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. And for the parents or caregiver, as far as intent and outcome, if your intentions might be good, but if the outcome is less than what it should be, then it's not good. So another way is to show trust to your young person. And let me tell you a little story. I was working with this young person, and the parents came in with him for their first session. And I was like, well, what's going on? And the mother was saying how she'd go online and check, and his homework wasn't being done. And she was really concerned that he was lying to them because she checked, the homework wasn't done, test wasn't recorded. And so I said, okay, let me spend a little bit of time with him. Why don't you 2 go get a cup of coffee and come back? So started to talk with this young person, and he started explaining that with the software program, one of 2 things often would happen. One, the teacher would post the information, however, it wouldn't actually hit the software program for a day or so. Or sometimes the teacher just forgot to post the test result or the fact that the homework was done. He said, my mother doesn't trust me when I tell her I did do my homework or I did take that test. I said, all right. So we talked about other things, and then the parents came back. And I said to the mom, here's something I would like to propose. For the next 2 or 3 weeks, you do not go on that software program at all. Don't check to see if his homework is done. Don't check to see if the tests were taken. And she started kind of reacting to that. So I said, what's the definition of insanity? And she said, well, I'm not quite sure. Her husband, being in recovery, did know the answer. And he said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing the same way, expecting different results. So I said to the mom, are you getting the results that you want? And she said, no. I said, okay, then let's try this experiment. 3 weeks went by, they drove up, and she probably jumped out of the car before the car stopped rolling. She said, it's a miracle. My son is doing his homework. My son is taking the tests. And she realized the mistake that she was making, and that helped their relationship as far as in building the trust. Another thing is rules. We all need rules. Households need rules. If you don't have rules, you have total chaos. And a good thing to think about is some rules are written in stone. They're not open to negotiation. Other rules are open to negotiation. A good example would be bedtime. Obviously, a 5-year-old's bedtime is going to be different than your high school student who's maybe a junior. He or she's not going to be going to bed at 6 in the evening. They were going to be staying up later. So you can negotiate. And that's a form of communicating, to have the rules, but also show your preteen or teen, your young person, that you're willing to discuss the rules and negotiate. And concerning rules, a lot of times people equate rules to punishment. That's not the case. What are rules for? Well, let's talk about discipline. The root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. We have rules, especially for our young people, to help teach them right from wrong, choices that are positive, choices that aren't so positive. That helps them out. The other thing, what I like to do is I like to look at rules as riverbanks. What I mean by that, what's the purpose of riverbanks? That's to keep the water flowing properly, because if you don't have riverbanks, what happens? The water goes out all over the ground, sometimes with a destructive force, and then after a period of time, it soaks down into the ground. So all that power, all that potential is lost. Likewise, rules for a young person, it helps them stay within the boundaries that we're setting up for them, but gives them the opportunity to explore, kind of try things out within a safe space. Praise. Don't we all like praise? Well, praise is a form of communication, and we all enjoy it, we all like it, and for some reason, we tend to give more praise to little ones, to children, than to older ones. Why? Maybe we like the reaction we get from the younger ones who get excited when we praise them, as opposed to, for some of you with your preteens or teens, you might praise them and you get the roll of the eyes and a whatever reaction to that. In spite of that, your young person wants praise, enjoys praise. But let's be realistic, what we praise about. Your young person gets out of bed, they don't deserve a praise. That's what they're supposed to do. Your young person does their morning hygiene routine, that's what they're supposed to do. They shouldn't be getting praise for that. That's just a given. But maybe they do well on a test, or they behave well at home. They're treating their siblings in a nice way. Of course, you want to give them praise for that, because positive breeds positive, negative breeds negative. So if we're constantly being negative with our young people, we're going to be getting back negative from them. And an important thing to keep in mind when we're communicating with our young person is, are what we're about to say or do, is that going to draw me closer to my young person or push me further away? And why is this important? Why is that an important concept? Because young people will either talk things out or act things out. So if they feel that we're pushing them away, or we're not listening, which we're going to be talking about shortly, then they will probably act things out. The other thing, and keep this in mind, young people sometimes ask for love in the most unloving of ways. So if they're reacting to you, if they're talking about something and they're really upset, this is why we're going to be talking about listening in a minute and why that's important to do. But before we talk about listening, let's talk about another concept, choice. We all have choices. And what young people are learning to do is what choices they're making and the consequences or impact those choices could have. So, for an example, your young person doesn't want to do his or her homework. That's a choice, but there's consequences with that. If they continue not to do their homework, they might fail that class or all their classes, and they may end up having to repeat that grade, which is something you don't want and something they don't want. However, that's a choice. The other aspect of that, if they don't do their homework, you will probably impose some form of a consequence upon them, which they probably won't like. So what's the second key to building and strengthening relationships? It's listening. And really there's two forms of listening. One is passive listening, and that would be your posture, your eye contact, your gestures. The other is active listening. And that means focusing on the young person. What is that young person saying while suspending your own judgments and emotional reactions? And formulas, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, what's the formula for listening? Hearing plus understanding and responding. So how do we engage in active listening? Well, we have to get ready to listen. And that may seem kind of silly, what I'm saying, but if your young person comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, I would like to talk with you, and you're on the phone, or you're reading the newspaper, or you're watching television, or you're listening to music, and you're like, yeah, okay, what? The message you're giving is you really aren't that important to me at that moment in time. Now, I am not saying that if you and your husband or a friend are having an in-depth conversation and your young person comes to you that you have to instantly stop what you're doing. No, you can turn and say, Junior, I'll be with you in about 10 minutes. I'll be glad to talk with you, but I need to finish this conversation, or I need to finish this phone call, or I'm writing an important letter right now and I will get to you. And that's teaching them patience. It's teaching them that the world doesn't revolve around them and that they need to wait. So hearing, what's really behind not only the words, but the emotions that are coming out. Because, for example, your young person might be saying to you, everything's fine, while they're crying their eyes out. So obviously their emotions and what they're saying don't equal. So, and responding, we want to reflect back to the young person our understanding of what they're asking or saying. And why is this important? Well, let me tell you the story about Johnny. Johnny comes home from school and says to his mom, Mom, where did I come from? So the mom instantly jumps to a conclusion and says, oh, it's time to tell Johnny about the birds and the bees. And the mom starts going into this whole discussion, explanation of where Johnny came from, how babies are born, how babies are made, and Johnny's eyes are getting bigger and bigger. And she finishes and says, there, did I answer your question of where you came from? And he goes, no, Billy told me he came from Detroit. So why we really need to know what our young person is asking or saying. So some tips for active listening. We should pay attention, and we should show that you are listening. And as I said before, you do that by putting down the newspaper, putting down your book, turning off the TV, whatever it might be, just so your young person knows that you're really paying attention. And you don't want to offer advice unless you're asked to offer advice. The other thing is you don't want to offer reassurance. You might say your young person might be sharing something with you, and you might say, oh, it's not that big a deal. But remember perception and reality. If your young person's perception is, this is a really big deal to me, by you saying, oh, it's not that big a deal, that can be confusing for your young person. So the other thing is you want to watch your young person's body language. They might be talking with you and they might say, oh, I'm not angry, but they're clenching their fists or they're stomping their foot. And be aware of your own body language. Are you sighing? Are you rolling your eyes? Are you yawning? These are all sending messages that what your young person is saying or sharing with you isn't important and you're showing impatience. So, and also pay attention to your young person's tone of voice. You've been around your young person long enough to know what their tone of voice is saying or not saying. And also to check your understanding once again. So you want to sometimes just sit back and listen to your child. I can remember when our girls were quite young, we'd be driving in the car, they're in the back seat, and for some reason, I guess they thought there was an invisible wall between the back seat and the front seat. I learned so much of what was happening in their lives by just listening to the two of them talk, or if they had a friend in the back seat, and they'd be talking about things. I didn't have to ask them what's going on. I could just listen quietly and learn. So there you go. These are the two keys of helping you build and strengthen relationships with your young person. So what are some of the takeaways today? Well, young people will either act it out or talk it out. And young people sometimes ask for love in the most unloving ways. It's important to remember perception, reality, intent, and outcome. And also remember, we're always communicating. And one of the most important things is what I'm about to say or do. Is that going to draw me closer to my young person or push me further away? And remember also, young people always have choices. And we always have choices as well. So what we're trying to do is help our young person navigate through the waters of life and to come through that time of being a preteen and a teen as they move into young adulthood, to have, hopefully we've given them some tools that they need and that they'll be able to use. So I want to thank you for being a part of this presentation. I wish you well on your journey with your preteen and teen. And remember, young people are awesome. And for us as parents and caregivers, it's a privilege to work with them. And if for some reason you are struggling or you're not quite sure what to do, feel free to call New London Counseling Center. We have a great group of people here who really enjoy working with young people and parents, caregivers, because our goal is to help families heal, to offer hope to families, to help families become whole after maybe going through something that was hard. So have a great day and goodbye.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. For more videos like this, along with wellness tips and news about upcoming events, please follow New London Counseling Center on Facebook and Instagram, and consider joining our newsletter at newlondoncounselingcenter.com/everydaywellness. New London Counseling Center is a nonprofit outpatient mental health clinic that promotes the emotional, relational, and spiritual well-being of individuals and families through the provision of high-quality, compassionate therapy and educational workshops regardless of one's ability to pay. In contributing to our mission, you can help to break financial barriers to care and make services available for those in need. Make your donation today at newlondoncounselingcenter.com/donate.